Hello there, my name is Hido and welcome to the Pantheon, where today we're in Modern Horizons 2 territory and we're looking at a really rather miserable mono-black commander. It's Tourach, the Dread Cantor. 2 mana for a 2/1 human cleric. And kicker of double black, which means you can pay an additional double black as you cast a spell to get an effect. Has protection from white, and whenever an opponent discards a card, put a 1/1 counter on Tourach Dread Cantor. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target opponent discards 2 cards at random. Now, a couple of you might know this character from Hymn to Tourach, you know, the card that this is based on. Double black for a sorcery, target player discards 2 cards at random. Absolutely oppressive in older formats. You know, discarding at random, it's not fun. So why do you want to do this in Commander? Well, because you hate your friends, and, you know, that's a very solid reason in my opinion. Who doesn't hate their friends and want to make them really suffer? Word of warning, they won't be happy with you about this deck, especially because the discard is targeted on your commander. Things like that really get people's back up. If you want to watch more of me talking about cards, please do subscribe. I'm going to be making a video like this for every single legendary creature ever printed, and, you know, I'm going to work my way through them slowly but surely. Without further ado, let's get in to number 5. And in number 5, we have Painful Quandary. 5 mana for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life, unless he or she discards a card. These sort of cards, you know, they're not very fun, but they give your opponent a choice. And, you know, giving your opponents a choice is really more interesting. And I think it will engage your opponents a lot more. So this is a great hate card, you know. What are they going to choose? Are they going to take the life loss or discard the card? Well, if they take the discarded card, our commander grows bigger, and we get some advantages from cards that are coming up in a bit. But the life loss is also really powerful, and eventually we'll get to our opponents not being able to pay the life loss. To go along with this, Court of Ambition is a 4 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, which means that at the end of our turn, we draw a card from the Monarch ability. But if an opponent deals damage to us, they become the Monarch and then draw a card. But you can get the Monarch back through combat damage. And because of our commander being protected from white, you can get in, you know, if our opponents are playing white, we can chip in there with a bit of damage. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card. If you're the Monarch, instead, each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. So again, it works into the discard theme that we want, but it can also just be some life loss. And, you know, people will be okay with that. Then we have Gibbering Descent. 6 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses 1 life and discards a card. Hellbent, which means if you don't have any cards in your hand, skip your upkeep step if you have no cards in hand. Coincidence. And then you can play this for its madness cost for 4 mana, which means as you discard this, you can cast it. And there are quite a few different ways that we ourselves will be discarding cards. So this card, it really hits everything. And it doesn't give an opponent a choice. It is every player's upkeep. So, you know, you can say, oh, well, you know, it's happening to all of us. And then Torment of Hailfire, double black and X for a sorcery. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices non-land permanent or discards a card. So it's giving our opponents a choice. Not a good choice. They're still going to be probably dead if you pump enough mana into this. But it's a cool little win condition. Which brings me on to number 4. And in at number 4, we've got Waste Not. So we're going to be making our opponents discard a lot of cards. We want to get a lot of benefit out of that. This is the perfect way of doing it. Whenever an opponent discards a creature card, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, add double black to your mana pool. Whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. The cool thing about this is with our commander, the discards are random. So we don't know what we're going to get, and neither do our opponents. But if the discards are your opponent's choice, they can choose which of these you're going to get. You know, probably they'll aim to try and give you mana when it's their turn, so you're not going to have much instant speed abilities. But a couple of other cool ways that we can use discards of our opponents. Liliana's Caress, double 2 mana for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. We're going to make them discard quite a lot of cards, so this can really stack up. And it's a theme of these 3 cards. Fell Spectre, 4 mana for a 1/3 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. And whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. It's almost like it's a Liliana's Caress stapled onto it. Then Megrim, 3 mana. Whenever an opponent discards a card, it deals 2 damage to that player. And again, not life loss, but it is damage. And all three of these are fantastic with our strategy. To go along with this, Geth's Grimoire is a 4-mana artifact. Whenever an opponent discards a card from his or her hand, you may draw a card. So with some of the big discard spells, this can draw us upwards of 20 cards in a 3-person pod. It's really, really fantastic. Then Tergrid, God of Fright, a incredibly imposing commander. 5 mana for a 4/5 with Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from their graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So you just steal everything that they're discarding. Absolutely fantastic. And then Tiny Bones Trinket Thief. 2 mana for a 1/2. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent discarded a card this turn, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Pay 6 mana. Each opponent with no cards in hand lose 10 life. Again, this can absolutely close out games, and just being able to draw a card every single time our opponent, every single end step, is really, really powerful. Which brings me on to number 3. And in number 3, He Who Hungers. This was actually my second ever commander deck that I built, and it was atrocious. But if you're going down the discard route, this is a guy, and a spirit sub-theme could be something you want to do. 5 mana for a 3/2 with flying. Pay 1, sacrifice a spirit. And He Who Hungers, which is a wonderful name, is also a spirit. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. Choose a card from it. That player discards that card. Play this ability only any time you can play a sorcery. Then Soul Shift 4. So when this dies, you can return to the battlefield, I think it is, a spirit with converted mana cost 4 or less. Might be to your hand. I can't actually remember. But wonderful, wonderful thing. And a spirit sub-theme is... this deck is miserable and really unfun for your opponents. But, ooh, look at me. I'm playing a wacky spirits deck. Might make it slightly more interesting. Akutu, Born of Ash, is a 4-mana 3/2 spirit with haste. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have more cards in hand than each opponent, you may sacrifice a swamp. If you do, return Akutu, Born of Ash from your graveyard to play. So again, a nice little hasty threat that works really well with the big spirit man. It can sacrifice this, then we can sacrifice swamp, get it back, sacrifice it again. And we can just keep using it. It's a nice little spirit that, doesn't see much play in other decks. And we're going to have more cards in our hand than any of our opponents. Then Midnight Banshee, 6 mana for a 5/5 with Wither, which means it deals damage to creature in the form of -1/-1 counters. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on each non-black creature, 1 mana black. So this can be just a one-sided board wipe, especially against tokens, and it just works excellently with the deck. Then Infernal Kirin, 4 mana for a 3/3 with flying, Spirit Kirin. Whenever you play a spirit or arcane spell, target player reveals his or her hand and discards all cards from that spell's converted mana cost. This can be absolutely devastating. You could hit, say you play a 4-mana spirit like the Akutu up there. This could, reveal Damnation, Solemn Simulacrum, and they have to discard all of them. It's very random, and it can hit absolutely nothing, and it's fun. Then Mind Slash is very much a reminiscent of He Who Hungers' ability. 3 mana for an enchantment, pay a black and sacrifice a creature. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. Choose a card from it, that player discards that card. Play this ability only anytime you can play a sorcery. If you manage to get either of these out early, you can actually make your opponents discard lands, as it doesn't say non-land, it's just any card in their hand, which can cripple them completely. Then, Iname Death Aspect is a 6 mana 4/4. When it comes into play, you may search your library for any number of spirit cards and put them into your graveyard. If you do, shuffle your library. This can be wonderful with any sort of mass reanimation sort of technology that we have. If you're playing a Living Death, you can dump all of your spirits in and flip them onto the battlefield. This is great. It just works so cool, and it's an interesting card to play. Then finally, Kakusho, the Evening Star. 6 mana for a 5/5 flyer. When it dies, each opponent loses 5 life. You gain life equal to life lost this way. This is a classic and will end some games. Really, really cool. And it's a dragon. In at number 2, we've got Mind Slicer. So, while our opponents will be unhappy that, that we're making them discard cards, why don't we join them and, everyone can just sit around with no cards in the hand. 4 mana for a 4/3 horror. When it is put into the graveyard from play, each player discards his or her hand. So we're joining them. You know, we're getting down in the mud. They can't really be angry at us, although they will be, because we're joining them as well. And that's the theme of this. Memory Jar, 5 mana for an artifact. Tap, sacrifice it. Each player exiles all cards from his or her hand face down and draws 7 cards. At the beginning of the next end step, each player discards his or her hand and returns his or her hand each card that were exiled this way. So, yes, this is very temporary, but we're going to get, if playing against 3 opponents, 21 discard triggers if we do this on our own turn, because more than likely they won't have some instance or something. So this gets a ton of triggers and we're all discarding together. Sort of. Then Dark Deal, 3 mana for a sorcery. Each player discards all cards in his or her hand and draws that many cards -1. A lovely little wheel effect and really, really powerful with our commander. It'll buff up our commander absolutely massively and then we can just get to swinging. Then we've got Awaken the Erstwhile. 5 mana for a sorcery. Each player discards all cards in their hand and creates that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Really cool. You know, we're going to have more cards in our hands than all our opponents, so we're going to end up with more 2/2s. And then, you know, everything's fair then. Everyone's got no cards in the hand. Why? No one could be angry at that, surely. I mean, they will be, but oh well. And in at number 1, one of my favourite sort of discardy cards, it's Myosian of Night's Reach, which is a spirit. 8 mana for a 5/2, which is an incredible stat line. When it comes into play with a divinity counter, if you played it from your hand, so you have to cast it from your hand. It has indestructible as long as there's a divinity counter on it. Remove a divinity counter from Myosian of Night's Reach. Each opponent discards his or her hand. Absolutely crippling. Your opponents will be in absolute shambles. Their hand will be just flung everywhere. And we're going to keep all of our cards in our hand. And, well, 8 mana is a lot, but in mono black, there's a lot of cool ramp options. And then, these are all sort of very oppressive cards. Greel, Mind Raker, is a 5 mana 3/3, and you can play a black and X and tap it, discarding 2 of the cards from your hand. Target player discards X cards at random from his or her hand. Random discard is utterly miserable, and this is repeatable. So, dear God, how unfortunate for your opponents. And Mind Shatter and Mind Twist are very, very, well, they are the cards that this is based on. Mind Shatter, double black and X. Target player discards X cards at random. You're just going to absolutely wipe out your opponent and it's all going to be random. So they're not going to know what they're discarding. They can't plan ahead to keep that Sol Ring in their hand. They're just going to discard whatever. And then finally, Mind Twist. Did I skip over Mind Twist? Oh yeah, I did. Mind Twist, a black and X. For Mind Twist, target player discards X cards at random. And look at that artwork. By God, look how miserable that man looks. That's going to be your opponents, your friends that you play with weekly. They're going to be unhappy. Wonderful. Herald of Anguish is a 7 mana 5/5 with Improvise, which means artifacts can help you cast a spell. So you can tap for any of the colorless mana, generic mana with your artifacts. Woo. Then as flying, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent discards a card. And you can pay 2 mana, sacrifice an artifact. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. In case your opponents start playing actual creatures, you can just kill them with this. Then Hypnotic Spectre, 3 mana for a 2/2. When it deals combat damage to an opponent, that player discards a card at random. Again, they're going to be miserable. Your opponents are going to be really unhappy. And then Liliana's Spectre, 3 mana for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. A classic, and you know, if you can reanimate this, you make them discard again. You're just going to get a ton of value and a lot of counters on your commander. So those are my top 5 cards for this brand new commander based on an incredibly old card. Really cool. I would never play this. I played He Who Hungers and no one wanted to play with me. I learnt my lesson, so I built Gaddock Teague. Did I learn that lesson? Anyway, while I ponder the mistakes I made in life, please consider subscribing, liking and commenting. I read all the comments and reply to them. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.